As a novelist, I enjoy and crave field research to support my writing, and I have a special place in my heart for South Pass City, because it played a prominent role in my first published novel, Jeremiah Bacon. First novels are always special. I have visited this historic site several times over the years, and I'd like to take you on a tour of the town now and show how the historic place influenced the novel. Jeremiah Bacon's adventure takes place in Wyoming, one of my favorite states. In the story, young Jeremiah, an aspiring concert pianist, is on his way from Boston by train with his parents to take advantage of a career opportunity in San Francisco. But Jeremiah's father is killed in a robbery of the Wells Fargo office in the whistle-stop town of Point of Rocks. Jeremiah and his mother stay in the little town, his mother to bury his father, the naive and callow Jeremiah to seek out the killers of his father. The greenhorn Jeremiah gets a job as a piano player in the local saloon. Saloons don't have pianists. He also gets a job helping drive a stagecoach from Point of Rocks to South Pass City, Atlantic City, and Lander. And he learns to use a gun. And he meets two women who complicate his life. These images show the relationship between South Pass City, Atlantic City, and Lander. They are at the foot of the beautiful Wind River Mountains. It is said that those mountains were favorites of Louis L'Amour. I've driven over them myself, and I highly recommend the trip. South Pass City was a gold rush boom town in 1868. But in contrast to other such transitory communities, South Pass City didn't become a complete ghost town when the good times ended fairly quickly. Some people still live in the town, and part of it has become the South Pass City State Historic Site. Atlantic City, about 4 miles north of South Pass City, was another gold rush boom town that never did quite die completely. It was made famous in 1978 when Robert Redford stopped at the local watering hole in town while doing research for his Esquire magazine article on riding the outlaw trail. I'll use this map as a guide to my walking tour of the site. South Pass City is nestled in a gulch. Given the topography of the land around it, you don't realize it is there until you suddenly come upon it. In my novel, Jeremiah's stagecoach, with Herb, the regular driver, first approaches the town from this direction, from the south. In my August 2019 visit, I reached the town from the north. So I stopped at the information signs first before descending into the gulch and the historic site. Gold was discovered in the Carissa lode in June 1867. The gold rush in the South Pass area really started in 1868, and South Pass City boomed with a population of maybe 2,000 to 3,000 people at its maximum. But some feel those numbers are exaggerations. But placer mining, panning for golden streams, doesn't last long, and the boom in the South Pass area only lasted a few years. The real gold riches come from finding the veins of gold in the granite rocks from which the nuggets and flakes found in the streams came. Hard rock mining, like that of the Carissa, is richer than placer mining, but also more technical, harder, more complicated, and takes a lot more money and resources. It was the Carissa mine that formed the backbone of the gold mining efforts in the South Pass area over the years and kept South Pass City viable. But the mine's profitability fluctuated. The mine opened and closed, and finally ceased operation for good in 1949. Just down the hill from the information signs is the Rock House. One building material that the area has in abundance is rocks. The parking lot. The picture featured on the sign is the most famous stretch of the main street of South Pass City. This is the formal entrance to the site. These days you pay a nominal admission fee in the dance hall, which serves as a visitor center. Years ago, you could just walk into the site. Even now, it would be easy to bypass this spot and just walk into the site from some other direction, but I'm happy to contribute to the maintenance of the site. Barney Tibbles was the manager of the Carissa mine in the 1890s. The back of this cabin dates from the 1860s, but but the front part was added in the 1880s. The Carissa Saloon was actually constructed around 1890, but I used this for my story, though I placed it, or a saloon like it, next to the hotel. The stage run from Point of Rocks to Lander and back was a 3-day journey, with one night spent in South Pass City going north and another night spent there going south. I pictured Jeremiah and Herb using this saloon on those 2 nights, and I used a cropped version of a photo I took as the basis for the cover of the ebook edition of the novel. It was a saloon. It had beer and cards and a piano and an obligatory nude on the wall, all elements in the novel. Jeremiah learned a lot out west. This is the Smith Sherlock Company store. It was built in 1896 from logs salvaged from an 1870 church. The Sherlock family operated this store until 1948. Today it is operated by the Friends of South Pass, a nonprofit organization. The post office in it operates from May to September. This is the historic site's gift shop, but in 2020 the functions of this store will be moved to the dance hall, and the store will be restored back to an historical point in the past. This video clip shows the main street. The staff work constantly maintaining the buildings and grounds, and they look well kept and loved. The buildings and grounds, I mean, not the staff. Note that there were not many people, tourists, around, and this was August. South Pass City is off the beaten path. The people you see in Willow Creek are panning for gold, one of the fun offerings of the historic site. The Houghton Cotter Store. A saloon was originally on this spot, but during the boomtown days, Albert Lyman Houghton and Thomas Cotter erected a general goods store on the lot. They left when the boom went bust, but in 1874, James Smith built this structure and ran a mercantile business from it for 20 years. Today, the building is used for exhibits on mining and geology. The stamp mill was used to crush ore. Mercury was used to leach out gold from the crushed ore in a process called amalgamation. The mercury was distilled off later to leave the gold behind. The mercury vapors were condensed and collected and reused. A monument commemorating the importance of the establishment of South Pass City. Early in its history, South Pass City was the county seat of Sweetwater County. The cave. There is a massive stone wall inside. It was built in 1868 and the interior room lined with locally kilned bricks. Perishable food and liquor were stored in the building. In the 1930s, an early wooden front room was replaced by concrete walls. Eventually, barrels of gasoline were stored here. The John and Lida Sherlock House. The house was built by the newlyweds in the late 1890s. The home was expanded over time. Many exhibits for the interior were donated by the Sherlock family descendants. Typical late 19th century homes out west tried to emulate homes in the east. From the Sherlock home, you walk up a hill toward the Wolverine Mine adit. An adit is the entrance to a mine, as well as a frequently used word in crossword puzzles. A stamp mill. Massive. It must have made a lot of noise in operation. This is the only mine at the historic site that you can enter. It doesn't go far, but it's best if you aren't claustrophobic anyway. This mine never produced a substantial amount of gold and was soon abandoned. The ground outside the Wolverine Mine adit does provide a nice view of this end of the town. Looking at this view, I try to picture it full of buildings. At its peak, South Pass City might have had several thousand people in it. But a decade after the rush, when my story takes place, 1880, the population was down to maybe 100. The schoolhouse. Initially, South Pass City was thought to have a bright future. In a March 16, 1868 report in the newspaper called Sweetwater Mines, a reporter predicted that this city will soon take rank among the magic cities of the West. A number of commodious buildings are already up, awaiting the finishing touch of the painter before being occupied. This gives a view of the business section from one end of the historic site. The Renaker Cabin. William Renaker and his son Fred lived in this cabin. Renaker was a Civil War veteran who went west to chase the promise of gold. South Pass itself, by the way, about 18 miles south of South Pass City, was an easy way to cross the Continental Divide on the Oregon Trail. The pass was a broad, open saddle in the mountains, about 35 miles wide. Wagon trains traveling through the pass couldn't really tell they were in a pass. It merely looked like any other stretch of prairie and sagebrush. But in South Pass, travelers passed from the Atlantic watershed to the Pacific watershed at an altitude of about 7,500 feet. Going to cross the main street now. This structure was the cabin of Edward Archibald Slack. He ran a newspaper in South Pass City until his office burned down in 1871. Slack was the son of Esther Hobart Morris. She is famous for being the first woman in the country to hold public office. In 1870, she was appointed by the governor of the territory to be Justice of the Peace for South Pass City, hearing both civil and criminal cases. She served in that capacity for 9 months until she moved away from the town. Wyoming was the first state or territory to give women the right to vote and to hold office in 1869. The bill to do so was introduced into the territorial legislature by William Bright, a South Pass City resident. The printing press used by Edward Slack for his newspaper survived the fire that wrecked his business. His newspaper office is recreated in the back room of the Slack cabin. This monument honoring Esther Morris was erected in 1939. The first reports of gold in the South Pass area came in 1842. There is evidence of a few mining activities in 1855, 1858, and 1860 to 1862. These early attempts probably failed because of the fierce resistance of the local Indians. This one-room cabin was owned by Mr. Cody as late as 1977. This blacksmith shop was erected about 1915. The logs to build it were salvaged from the 1868 Tickner store, which stood at the other end of the town. This garage was built to shelter Donald Sherlock's car. The historic site has changed over the years. Back in 1976, there was another building next to the Sherlock's garage, the Variety Theater. This is the much-featured view of the main strip of businesses in South Pass City. South Pass City on Willow Creek was the first mining town established in the area in 1867. The whole mining area around South Pass was referred to as the Sweetwater Mines, I suppose after the Sweetwater River. This ice house dates from the 1930s. Later, it was rented out as a cabin for summer residents. This reconstruction of the William Irvin store was built in the 1970s. I had this hotel firmly in mind when writing the novel of Jeremiah Bacon. It was opened in 1868 and said to be the finest of the hotels in town at the time. In my book, Herb shows Jeremiah how to make a good entrance into town. He gallops the horses down the hill coming from the left, crosses Willow Creek on the log bridge, turns sharply right, and comes to a screeching halt in front of the hotel. Herb and Jeremiah would spend the night at the hotel, using the next-door saloon in the evening. The next day they would head north out of town to Atlantic City and then Lander, then back to South Pass City for another night there. They would get to Point of Rocks again the next day. Here's an earlier view of the hotel. Note the suspicious-looking fellow on the boardwalk? Yeah, that's me. The hotel was bought in 1873 by Janet Sherlock, a widowed mother of 5. Also in 1873, she was appointed postmistress, and she incorporated a post office into the hotel. The restaurant was added much later in 1899. But in 1868, there was a saloon there. That's the one Jeremiah and Herb used. The family quarters were on the first floor. Guest rooms were upstairs. Only one of the guest rooms was provided with heat. Guests in the other rooms used several blankets, and guests might have to share beds with strangers. Holes above the doors permitted air circulation between rooms, but provided little in the way of shared heat. None of the rooms had plumbing. Note the chamber pots underneath the beds. Emptying the pots was often a chore for their owners' children. Bathing was from a pitcher of water and a basin on the washstands. There was an outhouse behind the hotel. The historic site has put a lot of effort into staging the rooms as if there were actually guests staying in them. This room was upstairs on the far right as you walked down the hall toward the back of the building. This is where I pictured Herb and Jeremiah staying. It's always easier to write a realistic scene if you can picture the setting distinctly, even if the setting doesn't show up explicitly in the narrative. The upstairs hallway was bright. When I stand in the backyard of the hotel, I know I am standing right in the spot where Herb gave Jeremiah lessons in fisticuffs. The Exchange Saloon. This building was erected in 1868. It served as a bank initially. The name derived from the bank's function of exchanging the miners' gold dust and nuggets of uncertain purity for minted coins of known gold and silver content. The bank profited by discounting the dust and nuggets. A bank is often one of the first businesses to appear in a mining boomtown, besides saloons and brothels. By 1873, the building was being used as a saloon. The Price Bridge. Charles Price was the South Pass City recorder in late 1867, the autumn before the big gold rush of the next year. Price named this street with its bridge after himself. The Sherlock Barn. This barn was built in the 1890s of logs salvaged from other structures. This part of town, on the south side of Willow Creek, had several stables which offered animals and wagons for rent or purchase. The Sherlock family also used the area to provide itself and customers with milk and eggs. The Log Miners Exchange Saloon was erected in 1868 by John Swingle. His business card listed him as contractor, builder, and undertaker. The card said, office on Price Street. Mining boomtowns usually had need of a jail. South Pass City was the county seat of Sweetwater County for a while, so a county jail was located in South Pass City. The jail was built in 1870 for $2,000, but the county seat was moved to Green River in 1873. This cabin was built in 1899 by Harry Libby. He'd lost employee housing at the Carissa Mine and built this log structure. He didn't stay long, and possession of the cabin changed hands many times over the years. The cabin had 2 very interesting photographs of South Pass City. One from 1869 at the peak of the gold rush. The other photo was from 1916. You can see that many buildings had disappeared in the intervening 47 years. William Carr operated this structure as a butcher shop starting in 1908. Previous to that, it was the home of Sam, or maybe Andrew Leckie and families. Sam and Andrew were brothers. Sam Leckie had a lease on the Carissa Mine for a while. Later, he helped establish sheep ranching near South Pass City. Andrew Leckie died in a fall in the mine. There is a cemetery on the hill above the town. This road is what I picture Jeremiah driving the stage down and up. Turn left at the bottom of the hill and head into town. Turn right onto the main street and to the hotel. Back up the hill 2 days later. The cemetery doesn't look like it's been used in over 100 years. Few grave sites are visible. They either got obliterated over the century and a half, or there weren't many to begin with. I found a few tombstones, very poignant. The graves were of children. But the cemetery hill does give a good viewpoint for looking over the town. I took this video clip from just below the cemetery. The title slide at the very beginning of this video was also taken from near this spot. I used this book for background material on the gold rush in the South Pass area. James Chisholm was a staff writer for the Chicago Tribune, so the journal is articulate, thorough, and full of delicious detail of the mining life in the region, much more than just South Pass City. Visit the website of the Friends of South Pass. Consider joining. There are various levels of support. Visit my YouTube channel for many videos on the West and the Civil War. And my website has information on all of my novels, as well as links to resources on fiction writing, the Old West, the Civil War, nautical fiction in the sea, and other stuff. I'm also on Facebook, of course. Hope you enjoyed the tour.